Usually I prefer older games. 2D sprites and animation has always been my jam, and it's rare to find a new game that falls into these categories, but one does this and more. SkullGirls is an indie fighting game released in 2012 originally on the PlayStation 3. Instead of hitting up with sequel after sequel after sequel, the game has been constantly receiving updates and brought to new platforms. A game run in a very mobile sort of way that's not common in home releases, at least not to this extent. Now, I've heard of SkullGirls before. I've been amazed just from the glimpses of the art style. It looks like something I would love. It's just never been a game I've come across that often. That is, until now. So join me as I get a fresh retrospective on SkullGirls. I'm Budget Disney Princess, and this is my retrospective of SkullGirls. The fighting game craze was in a great swing in the early 2010s. Street Fighter 4 had been a massive success, and Mortal Kombat 9 had joined in on that success. A mixture of nostalgia and finely accessible online play had people hungry for more, and SkullGirls wanted to jump in, but not in a standard way. While it definitely took inspiration from old sprite-based games like Darkstalkers and Street Fighter, SkullGirls also decided to take animation styles from old cartoons to help give it its own unique style, with famous comic book artist Mike Mignola and Bruce Timm being named as influences. In fact, before the fighting game idea was even pitched, the concepts were drawn by head artist Alex A. Head, before eventually the idea was pitched as a fighting game to the studio Lab Zero Games to use Mike Silmont's engine, with Alex himself taking up the reins as the head artist leading the team. SkullGirls was originally developed by Lab Zero Games on a very low budget. This game was originally only supposed to be a budget title, releasing on Xbox Live Arcade and the PlayStation 3 Network Store in 2012. While it wasn't expected to compete with successful games like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat at the time, the game, through reviews and word of mouth, began to cultivate its own fan base. But even with that success, the original game had to be taken down due to a dispute with everyone's favourite game company, Konami. Konami. When people say EA has handled their IPs worse than any other company, Konami is slipping out the back door. This wasn't the end, however, as SkullGirls was released again as SkullGirls First Encore for the newer consoles like the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Again, while also finding surprising success in the SkullGirls mobile game, which ended up being a hit. It's a prequel, which I will mention some of the prequel in the story, but SkullGirls Mobile has become so big at this point, it would need its own video, so I'll be sticking to the console version primarily. It then began receiving another revitalization in SkullGirls Second Encore, being also released on the PS5 and whatever the hell the new Xbox is called, which is where we're at now. Now, you can critique this game all you want, but one thing you can't deny is that this is a game that is very confident with its presentation and oozing style. The menus are simplistic and clean and get the job done, going for this old school curtains up type cartoonish kind of vibe. It's not overly animated or too busy like some menus are in fighting games. Perfect mix as it gets the vibes just right. There's a good selection of modes here, arcade mode of course, along with a story mode which includes a story for all characters, a training mode, a well done tutorial mode that is handy for learning the ins and outs, and a survival mode. The character models are the real focus though. The models, unlike a lot of games at the time, were hand drawn, and the fluid motion really comes off when transferring from move to move. They flow in together well, and that is vital, but that's not the only thing. The characters have various winning animations that really help their personality shine through. Now there's one thing, you may look at SkullGirls at first glance, you see the overly cartoonish art style, you may think that this game is a straight up comedy. And while the characters have some elements, the core story of SkullGirls is actually pretty dark. Parasites are a huge part of the lore, with many characters having them. They bond with their hosts and perform a mutual relationship. They have existed since the beginning and have granted their host special abilities. Unfortunately, a parasite called Sekhmet manipulated the world around her to make parasites be seen as evil, causing parasites and their hosts to face a lot of discrimination. Over time, with science, artificial parasites were now being made. So if you wonder where the special powers of the characters come from, it's probably a parasite. And simply put, they share less in common with real life parasites and more in common with the symbiotes in Spider-Man. Years ago, a trio of goddesses arrived on the Earth. Aeon, the goddess of time and alternate realities, she uses her parasite Kronos to help her with her time abilities. Venus Lovelace, the goddess of space, who doesn't seem nearly as interested in the plan as her family, but she's here simply for the fact she was bored. She's infected by a parasite named Abaddon. Finally, the big bad of the Trinity is Queen Nemea, who also goes by Mother, and shockingly is the mother of Venus and Aeon. She's the big bad and the most powerful of the three. A character that uses her servant form to fight, Double, a creature that takes on many forms, most commonly a nun. Queen Nemea actually has very little backstory, as she usually manipulates those around her to work for her. but what is known is that she's extremely powerful and the creator of the game's MacGuffin, the Skull Heart. The Skull Heart is an item that appears every 7 years and will grant the wish of the woman who touches it, but with a catch. If the heart regards you as impure, then the person who made the wish will become the SkullGirl, and unfortunately, the Skull Heart is like a monkey paw, as it views the smallest detail as impure, and being that this was Mother's plan all along, it seems pretty evident this is how things will go. This also leads to many organisations whose sole purpose is to destroy the SkullGirls. The game revolves around the Skull Heart, which is also the inspiration for Dan Aykroyd's Crystal Skull vodka. How do I know this? Even without the SkullGirls' help, humans jumped into war with most of the world being destroyed, leaving a few cities and the rest of the world a desolate wasteland known as No Man's Land. Even with all the destruction, the war was still ongoing. The Queen of the Canopy Kingdom made a wish to the Skull Heart for the war to end, which made her become a SkullGirl, which actually helps her wish come true, as the humans join forces to defeat her, and as they rebuild, relative peace comes. Gangs have decided to jump in and snatch power during this phase, the biggest one being the Medici Mafia, who will be a cause of a lot of the problems later. One day Patricia, who would later become Peacock, and Marie, who would later become Bloody Marie, were travelling through No Man's Land when they were attacked by slave traders who worked for the Medici Mafia. Patricia sacrificed herself, causing her to become mutilated and dismembered in the process. But it also allowed Marie to escape. Marie vows revenge on the Medicis, vowing to wipe them all out. Double appears to her, gifting her the Skull Heart to take her revenge, and she becomes Bloody Marie, allowing her to raise the armies from the dead. Unexpectedly though, Marie has more willpower than anyone could have expected, and instead of being blinded by rage, focuses that rage on the Medicis. As the world plunges into chaos, everyone wants to destroy the SkullGirl and grab the Skull Heart, whether for their own selfish gains or whether to pursue the noble act of destroying it. This is where the game officially begins. So who's in the roster? Unlike most fighting games who have a face of the series, SkullGirls doesn't really have a main protagonist of the franchise. So I'll just go through them all as I see fit. Parasol, the current Queen of the Canopy Kingdom, whose mother had been the previous SkullGirl, has taken a vow to destroy the Skull Heart. Just because she's a queen doesn't mean she doesn't get her hands dirty, as she runs a team called the Black Elfette. As well as going after the Skull Heart, they also work to destroy the evil armies of the undead. Nadia Fortune, known as Miss Fortune, a Catwoman who's a thief, which is mandatory I guess, cause cat burglar, you get it. She is the last remaining member of the Fishbone Gang, a group of thieves that came into the possession of the Life Gem, and when the Medici Mafia finds out, they send their top assassin Black Dahlia to retrieve it. Miss Fortune eats the Life Gem, which not only helps her to survive, but also grants her the ability to remove or extend her body parts. She's looking for the Skull Heart to wish her gang back to life. A fan favourite is Sienna Contielli, more commonly known by her nickname Squiggly, who, like many of the other characters, her parasite Leviathan is handed down through her family. The Contiellis were the Medici's performers, known for their opera skills. When Squiggly's mother comes in possession of the Skull Heart, the Medicis wipe out her family, including herself. She rises from the grave as the SkullGirl appears, but due to Leviathan, she manages to keep her own free will and sets off on her own journey to destroy the Skull Heart. She's not the only performer, as Cerebella is the lead performer of a circus group called Cirque de Carte, a group funded by the Medicis. She also works as an enforcer for them. With the help of her living weapon, vice versa, the two giant arms on top of her head. She is also the main grappler of the series. She's not what she seems though. A survivor of No Man's Land, she was adopted by Vitali Medici and views him as her father. She's deluded into thinking the Medici aren't the Mafia, but the good guys, and underneath it all, she does have a kind heart. The closest we actually get to a main protagonist is Philia, a young woman with amnesia. She hooked up with an ancient parasite called Samson. Samson is arrogant and loud-mouthed like a Kardashian, but unlike a Kardashian, he actually is very caring and protective. Philia is actually Medici, but unlike her family, she's a kind-hearted girl. Her reason for looking for the Skull Heart is to wish her memories back. Back before she lost her memory, a girl named Carol was Philia's best friend. She was the only girl who wasn't afraid to get close to Philia, as all the other girls were afraid something horrible would happen to them if they hung around her. Anyway, something horrible happens to Carol. She ends up being kidnapped by Valentine under the orders of Brain Drain, and is to be tortured and experimented on to become the ultimate anti-SkullGirl weapon known as Painwheel. Although she's much harder to control, and she only plans to end Brain Drain and Valentine for what they did to her. Valentine is not a nice person. She will work for anyone. She's the last remaining member of the Last Hope Squad, a group of combat medics who ended up being wiped out by Marie. After wiping out her squad, Marie gave her the option of working for her, so Valentine joins Marie. Brain Drain, who I mentioned, is not a playable character, but he does play a big part in a lot of the story. He's a psychic and the sole survivor of his own experiments, gaining psychic abilities, becoming the head of Lab 7, now doing his own experiments on other unsuspecting victims. He created Robo Fortune after being annoyed by Miss Fortune's power and thinking he can make something better. For some unknown reason though, one of her directives ends up being to perfect her comedy, which means he is constantly quipping. In fact, one of her first lines is asking, "Can I have cheeseburger?" This game came out in 2012. There is Fukia, who is a copy of Philia created by Brain Drain. She is not really canon to the story, so she doesn't really appear much. There is Eliza, whose parasite is called Sekhmet. Sekhmet is one of the most oldest and dangerous parasites, and basically is the reason why parasites are so hated today. Eliza was originally supposed to be the big bad of SkullGirls 2, which ended up being scrapped, so she was made into a DLC character. Eliza is a singer who made a deal with Sekhmet. Sekhmet wants to plan out her evil deeds, while Eliza is completely enthralled by the fact that she will remain young forever. So that's her whole deal. As nefarious as Brain Drain is, not many people know his true nature, not even his co-workers like Dr. Avian, another anti-Skullgirl lab head who does similar work, however less severe. He is the head of Lab 8 who is responsible for the rest of the cast. Ben Birdland was once a cop who fought for justice. Unfortunately, many of his partners on the force weren't as noble and taking payment from the Medici Mafia. No matter what they did, Ben won't get off the case, so eventually his partners jump him and beat him to near death. He is found by Dr. Avian, who fixes him up and gives him a new body and a new name, Big Bang. Big Bang actually surprisingly enjoys his new body and continues on his original journey to take down the Medici Mafia, while also becoming the second in command in Lab 8. Peacock was once known by her name Patricia. She was the girl with Marie who was captured by the slave traders and was mutilated. She was near death before Dr. Avian found her, replacing her body parts. Despite her horrific past, brass nature, and being referred to as having a damaged psyche, Peacock is actually pretty good. She is loyal to her friends and enjoys watching cartoons, being a massive fan of a show called Annie of the Stars. Despite her whole creation revolving around destroying the SkullGirl, upon finding out that it's Marie, she doesn't want to kill her and wants to find another way to save her best friend. And the final character is a guy named Beowulf. Beowulf is an honourable guy, although to be honest he's not the brightest. He was a wrestler known for defeating the unstoppable monster Grendel, and then Grendel's mom when she flipped out after seeing her son die. Beowulf's want for fame and kind nature, however, makes him a target to be manipulated, especially by his shady manager Zane. He finds out later on that his famous fight with Grendel was actually set up as Grendel had been drugged before. He announces to his fans that the match was staged and he will redeem himself by being the one to take down the SkullGirl. So that is the base roster of SkullGirls, a good variety of mixture. The stages thankfully nailed it. From the minimalist design of class notes to more relaxing settings like Maple Crest, more packed stages like Little Innsmouth, or fine stages like the Grand Cathedral and the Final Atrium, they all do their best to provide their own form of ambience. You can feel the progression of the stages getting more isolated as you reach a goal, and while I do enjoy the later stages, I would be lying if I said it wasn't the more normal stages I think SkullGirls' art style really excels at. My favourite stage in this game is Maple Crest, which funnily enough also has my favourite song of the game. This bright and colourful stage with so many characters sitting out to watch the fight gives so much personality. Another one of my favourites is Under the Bridge, which also is another bright stage with multiple characters watching the match. I don't think the animation of the background characters is nearly as good as other games like the background of say Street Fighter or especially King of Fighters, but while they're not animated as heavily, they manage to get the point across and their presence is felt. While I do enjoy stages like the Grand Cathedral, they do feel a little empty, and while I say you can feel isolated in a later stage of the game, I think for a game so fast paced, it's really hard to get this point across. Lab 8 will be a good mix of being a more darker stage that still has a lot going on in the background, a perfect blend. For a game so heavily engrossed with the animation, I think this game shines brightest when the animators are given free rein to fill up the screen. The sound effects were given just as much effort. The smacks can sound pretty good, and when the more wacky obscure things come out, the cartoonish sound effects will come out providing a satisfying bang. You know the whole awooga humana 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 type thing? Yeah, it nails that. SkullGirls is known for having an incredible soundtrack, but unfortunately is known for having multiple. Many saying the mobile version is the best, many saying this one, and many also claiming the original soundtrack is the best. Now I will be solely judging this soundtrack without looking at the other variants, and thankfully will say from what I've heard in this game, it's pretty freaking sweet. When you open the game you're met with smooth jazz, which goes perfectly with the vibe of the game, and then you enter the game. The vibe hits great with tracks like Moonlight Melee before progressively getting harder with more hard-hitting tracks like Skullheart Antithesis, adding in a lot more hard-hitting and heavy instrument. The standout track for me though is the track The Lives We Left Behind, which falls more into the relaxing sphere, but differs with the vocal backings which give it this nostalgic feeling that goes so well. The soundtrack is incredible for what I've heard, with the worst tracks being okay, but the majority of it being bangers. I've spent so long praising this game for its visuals, but that doesn't mean a thing if the game doesn't play well, and thankfully this game doesn't fail to deliver in that department. The combos feel immediate and mixing and matching is extremely fun to discover how to pull off the most devastating combo. This isn't as flashy as Arc System Works' current endeavours, and I would say it feels closer in vibes to older 2D games like Darkstalkers more than any game released lately. The game uses a 6-button layout identical to Street Fighter, with light and medium kicks designated to the face buttons, while the heavy punching kick is designated to the shoulder buttons. The combos are fluid, and one of SkullGirls' features is mixing up a combo to throw your opponent into the air and continue that combo. It's simple, and with the right amount of practice, the damage you can do with a huge combo can be devastating. There is a special move as well that can be activated by pressing 2 kicks together. This is a much simpler special move to pull off, although I feel it's pretty difficult to link it directly from a combo. There is 2 variants however you get to choose from the character select screen. I've said multiple times before, I'm not a huge fan of special moves as a freebie, but SkullGirls does it right. They're not too easy to pull off, they aren't overly flashy or take ages, and they don't decimate your opponent's health bar. There is one thing I do have a problem with, and that's the dash/run. Each character has a dash/run, and it's far from reliable. It's easier to do if you use the D-pad over the analog, but still it's very stiff, making it very difficult to use them in combos. In fact, I don't think I've ever nailed one properly. Now, it could be my controller setup, but I've tried this on the PlayStation 4 standard controller and an arcade stick with the same results. It seems to only activate when nothing else is being pressed and can't be cancelled from a move. Another big thing is this game has massive difficulty spikes. Characters like Beowulf and Big Ben seem to always give me trouble no matter the difficulty. Big Ben can hit ridiculously hard with a massive hitbox, and Beowulf seems to always turn a hit into a combo that can demolish your health bar. But I would take the difficulty spikes over my biggest criticism, and that is the final boss. I mentioned in my Dead or Alive 3 video ages ago how I hate bosses who switch up the gameplay, and while the final boss doesn't switch up the gameplay as drastically as Dead or Alive 3, it follows the same rules. The final boss doesn't play like any other character in the game. Marie the SkullGirl doesn't get stunned or can't be comboed into, and instead shoots projectiles. In fact, going in for a combo can leave you wide open to be punished. This means the most effective method is to repeatedly heavy attack, watch your hand and block. The final boss makes use of none of the skills you use to get to this point. Overall, the gameplay is solid with a few things that could be tweaked here and there. You're still going to have a great time playing this game despite some minor annoyances. This game is pretty stacked with unlockables. The gallery is pretty gosh darn stacked, from character art to fan art to production and original character designs. Movies, sounds and cutscenes are unlocked by pursuing through the story and arcade mode, along with colour palettes to be unlocked for each character. With each character having a selection of over 30 colour palettes, this is pretty awesome. There is no extra costumes, and that's completely understandable. To animate these characters hand drawn, they take a hefty amount of time and effort, rather than using the compooper, so the colour palettes are very much appreciated here. In fact, some colour palettes are direct references to other franchises. Peacock has a colour palette that makes her coloured like Mickey Mouse from the classic cartoons. Two of my personal favourites, however, though, are Parasol having a palette that references Cuda Diamond from the King of Fighters, and Beowulf having a colour that references Wolverine from the 97 animated show. Not only the costume, but you can change voices of certain characters, like Painwheel having a Valley Girl voice, saying stuff like totally and fabulous. And Peacock having an anime voice which references animes like Yu-Gi-Oh! Over her classic cartoons. There is also a bonus mode in the extras called Marie 300, a ridiculously difficult variant of Marie the final boss. If you do manage to beat this mode, you unlock everything in the gallery. This mode is really difficult, and I didn't want to pass it. With everything unlocked immediately, then there's really nothing to work towards. I suppose I should talk about the DLC, because yes, this game does have DLC. Unfortunately, SkullGirls doesn't have a version with every character available from the go. There is a season pass for €35, which is €10 more than the actual game. It contains Black Dahlia, the Medici's top assassin, Umbrella, Power Soul's little sister, a playable version of Marie, and the main reason I ended up buying the DLC, Any of the Stars. It did thankfully end up better than I expected. It comes with about 6 hours more story, new art in the gallery, new colour palettes, new stages, and a downloadable soundtrack, which is cool. The reason I wanted Annie so bad was because this was my first unlock in SkullGirls Mobile, and I used her all the time there. Do I think this DLC is worth it? If you're a big fan of the game, then yeah, I'd get it, but not unless you know for certain you're going to get your money's worth. This DLC is a pretty penny after all. I guess though it is the only DLC released, so just with this one pass you do get a complete version of the game. SkullGirls is a great game that oozes personality. A game that has tried for so long due to its timeless art style. As weird as it is to say though, I think this game is truly appreciated more by those who are already huge fans of fighting games. Understanding the time that went into animating this game, along with the effort it took to make these moves flow in fluidly to each other, it's astonishing. There is something I must talk about though. While this game has definitely garnered its own huge fanbase that has played for years now, that fanbase isn't popping off like it used to. A SkullGirls 2 already been scrapped, and after a Season 1 DLC dropped, there has been complete silence on a Season 2 drop. Unless this game builds upon itself or changes drastically, I can't see a lot of new interest. But simply, if you are a fan of 2D fighters, hand-drawn animation, and old school fighting game styles with a more modern feel, then I don't think there is anything I could suggest more than SkullGirls. I've been Budget Disney's Princess, and this has been my SkullGirls retrospective.